Hi, my name's Mark. I'm one of the pastors here at Trillium. You know, for the last 3 weeks, we've been studying resurrection, and we're going to continue to study resurrection over the next 3 weeks. We've been looking at Paul's first letter to the Corinthian church, chapter 15. Paul wrote 2 letters to the church community in Corinth, and we're looking at the first letter that he wrote a couple of years after he had planted that church in that city. You know, Paul in chapter 15 is really focused on resurrection. Seems appropriate in the season of Easter to talk about resurrection. And that's what we're doing at Trillium, spending 6 weeks looking at the question of resurrection. Jesus' resurrection and our resurrection. Maybe it's a good time to recap just briefly what Paul has been talking about over the last few weeks. In week 1, Paul talks about where does the resurrection begin. Of course, it begins with Jesus, doesn't it? And begins on Easter morning. And Paul talks about those first appearances of Jesus to those first disciples, Peter, and then to the 12, and then to the 500, and then to James, and then finally to all the apostles. At the very end, he adds himself into that sequence of appearances. And what Paul's trying to get at in this part of his letter is the question of resurrection being at the very core, the foundation of that first church community. There is no church. There's no church in the first century. There's no church today without resurrection. Those first disciples of Jesus gather after his crucifixion on the basis of his resurrection and his appearances to them. And that's how the church gets started. In week 2, we looked at the question of who does the resurrection belong to? See, in the ancient world, people had a very pessimistic view of death. They believed that when you died, you went to the shadows. Only the most noble or ascended of spirits gets to go to live in the heavens with the gods or with God. Of course, there's the demigods in the Greek world, and in Hebrew thinking, Moses, Elijah, Enoch, these ascended masters get to live with God. But for the rest of us, we go to Hades or Sheol to live out in the shadowlands, in that gray, ephemeral world of nothing. Not a very pleasant thought for people. And some people in the Corinthian church were saying that when Jesus was resurrected, it didn't change anything for the rest of us. We're still going to the shadowlands. Paul says to those Corinthians that not only was Jesus resurrected, but his resurrection is a signal to us of God's intention for us. That Jesus himself is the beginning, the first fruits of a resurrection that will come to all people. And the shadowlands is no place for God's children to be remaining. And the promise of Jesus' resurrection to us is that God intends his children to live with him in heaven, all people. In week 3, the question was, where does the resurrection get its completion or its consummation? Paul makes the point that resurrection life will ultimately be consummated in God reclaiming the whole created order. God wants it all. God wants you, God wants me, God wants every molecule, every atom, every electron, and everything in between. God wants it all. When God has the Son subjugate all the creation to his power, and when the Son himself is subjugated to the Father's power, then God will be all in all, is what Paul tells us. That's good news for us, really good news. This week we're looking at the question of Paul's own intersection with resurrection. You know, he had a pretty hard life as a minister, as an agent of the good news, of the gospel, as an apostle. He suffered many trials and tribulations. He lived a dangerous life, and he reminds the Corinthians that this danger was incurred by him because of resurrection, because of Jesus' resurrection, but most importantly because we ourselves belong to resurrection. We are resurrection. We are meant as God's children to live out resurrection, not just in the next life, but in this life. You know, I've been reading some James Bond novels lately. In fact, I've been reading them in the order that the movies were made. My friend Sally and I are watching each of the movies in their order. We just finished Goldfinger, which is the 3rd movie, and I had read the book before we watched the movie. I just finished reading Thunderball, which is the 4th movie of the Bond series. You know, it's a great story, lots of excitement. Bond lived in a very dangerous world. Paul lives in a dangerous world. Bond lives in a very dangerous world, and he risks himself in some very profound ways. And as I read the novels, I'm trying to get a sense of why Bond puts his life on the line like he does. Like, what causes him to take those risks? Is it the money or the excitement or the women or a host of other possibilities? And I can't really get to the heart of what Bond's motivation really is. You know, this world of death and destruction is something that Bond overcomes in each of the stories. Spectre, in this story, in the fourth story, Thunderball, is defeated by Bond. The world is momentarily saved, but nothing deep has changed. That same world is at play in the next book and in the next movie. It keeps going on and on and on, and nothing fundamentally has changed at all. See, Paul is an agent of resurrection. He is risking his life in so many ways. He's engaged in that dangerous activity because he believes in the power of God's resurrection to change everything. You know, Bond has these moments of insight, these moments of wonder. He sometimes doubts himself in his work. He questions the meaning of his life. There's this wonderful moment in the Thunderball book where he has this conversation with Domino Vitelli. The vixen of the story, she's the mistress of the arch villain. And they had this amazingly intimate exchange, surprising for a Bond novel. And you can sense their loneliness and the meaninglessness of it all in their lives. You wonder where it's going to take them. For Paul, there's a deep meaning in the resurrection. We know who we are. We know the God purpose that's moving through us. And he invites us to join him in being apostles, as being instruments of God's divine wave of love and peace to the world. And how about this day, friends, that you and I join in creating the world, the heavenly place on earth that's rooted in love and peace and joy, and let God's great dominion over all things find its completion in us, so that we too can know that God is all in our hearts, our minds, our lives, our bodies this day. Praise resurrection, praise life. God bless. Thank you.